The ion storm caught Dr. Elio Marsden's research vessel completely off guard. One moment, he was calmly charting the crystalline formations of Viridia's upper atmosphere. The next, his ship was spiraling toward the moon's surface, trailing smoke and shattered components. Mayday, mayday. Research vessel horizon compromised. Emergency landing protocol engaged. Elio called into the comms, knowing full well the magnetic interference would prevent any signal from reaching the research base orbiting the nearby gas giant. His hands flew across the controls, dark eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching surface below, a landscape of jutting crystal formations and strange, pulsating flora that reminded him of Earth's deep-sea creatures. The impact came hard and fast. Metal screamed against crystal, and Elio's world became a chaotic blur of flashing emergency lights and blaring alarms. Something sharp sliced through his flight suit, tearing into the flesh of his side. The last thing he remembered before darkness claimed him was the scent of ozone and the gentle, rhythmic pulse of light filtering through the shattered viewport. When consciousness returned, it came in waves. First, sensation, something cool and damp against his forehead. Then sound, a soft melodic humming that seemed to vibrate through his bones rather than reach his ears. Finally, sight, as his eyes fluttered open. He found himself staring into the most extraordinary face he had ever seen. She. No. For the being before him appeared distinctly feminine despite her alien features, had skin the color of twilight amethyst, luminescent patterns tracing beneath its surface like flowing circuits. Her eyes were large, iridescent, with no discernible pupils, yet somehow conveying intense focus as they studied him. Her features were delicate, with high cheekbones and a slender nose that flared slightly at its tip. A corona of tendrils that resembled hair framed her face, each one emitting a faint bioluminescent glow that shifted in hue as she moved. Elio tried to speak, but found his throat raw and parched. The being tilted her head, those strange eyes blinking in a pattern that seemed almost musical in its rhythm. She reached toward him, hesitating just inches from his face. "Who?" he managed to croak before she placed a slender finger against his lips. The moment her skin touched his, a sensation like warm honey poured through his consciousness, a feeling of reassurance, of safety, as tangible as if she'd spoken the words aloud: rest, safe, heal. The concepts weren't words, exactly, but impressions that bloomed in his mind with absolute clarity. Elio's scientific training screamed that this was impossible, yet he couldn't deny the experience. Somehow this being was communicating directly through touch. He glanced around, realizing he was no longer in his crashed ship, but inside what appeared to be a dwelling carved from a single massive crystal. The walls refracted light in hypnotic patterns. Strange objects that might have been furniture or artwork dotted the space. Outside, through a circular opening, he glimpsed a forest of crystalline trees, their branches laden with glowing fruits or flowers. The purple-skinned being a woman, a female of her species, moved with liquid grace as she retrieved something from a hollow in the wall, a container of some sort filled with luminescent liquid. She returned to his side, sitting on what he now recognized as a bed of soft, moss-like material. Again she reached for him, this time placing her palm gently against his injured side. The pain immediately dulled, replaced by a cooling sensation. Her free hand offered the container. Elio hesitated, his scientist's caution warring with his desperate thirst. She seemed to sense his apprehension, because her skin pulsed once with light, and another impression flowed through their point of contact. Healing, strength, trust. He accepted the drink. And as the sweet liquid coursed through him, he realized how completely at the mercy of this silent, mysterious being he truly was. In the deepest reaches of unexplored space, on a moon barely catalogued by human science, Elio Marsden had become utterly dependent on a woman who spoke without sound and claimed his trust without a single word. 3 days passed in Naira's crystal sanctuary, though time felt fluid to Elio without the strict measurements of his ship's chronometer. His wound had closed remarkably. Fast under her ministrations, a salve of bioluminescent paste that tingled pleasantly as it knit his flesh together. He'd learned her name through a ritual that still mystified him. On the second day, she had placed both hands on either side of his face, her large, pupilless eyes staring intently into his. A wave of impressions had washed over him, her essence, her identity, and somehow he simply knew her name was Naira. Elio, he had responded, tapping his chest. I'm Elio. Her skin had pulsed with a pattern he now recognized as pleasure or amusement. She'd repeated the gesture, touching her own chest, and somehow projected her understanding of his name back to him, though the sensation felt strange, as if his name had texture and color rather than sound. Today, Elio could finally stand without assistance. Naira watched him from across the chamber, her tendrils shifting in hues of lavender and azure as he tested his strength. When he smiled at her, the colors intensified, and he wondered if this was her equivalent of blushing. I need to see my ship, he said, knowing she wouldn't understand the words, but hoping his intent would be clear. He mimicked the motion of walking with his fingers, and made a shape with his hands that approximated his vessel. Naira tilted her head, tendrils swirling in contemplation. Then she approached, extending her hand, palm up, an invitation he'd come to recognize. Elio placed his hand in hers, and immediately felt her cautious agreement. Tinged with concern, the moment they stepped outside, Elio gasped. The crystal forest stretched in every direction, each formation refracting light in hypnotic patterns. The ground beneath his feet was carpeted with something that resembled moss but pulsed with gentle bioluminescence wherever they stepped. Above, the gas giant that Viridia orbited dominated the sky, its swirling bands of crimson and gold casting the landscape in a perpetual twilight. Naira guided him along a path that seemed to reveal itself only as they approached. Occasionally, she would stop to touch a crystal formation, causing it to resonate with a tone that Elio felt rather than heard. Each time, he experienced a fragment of memory or emotion, her favorite places. Moments of solitude, the simple joy of existence. He realized she was sharing her world with him in the only way she knew how. When they reached his ship, Elio's heart sank. The horizon lay crumpled against a massive crystal spire, its hull breached in multiple places. The emergency beacon was dark, and the auxiliary power cells appeared completely drained. Without proper tools and replacement parts, repairs would be impossible. He felt a gentle pressure on his arm and turned to find Naira studying his face with those luminous eyes. Her hand slid down to his, fingers intertwining with his own. Through the contact came a wave of understanding and something else, a tentative question, an offer of belonging. Stay. Home. Together? The question wasn't formed in words, but Elio understood its meaning perfectly. His throat tightened with emotion. He squeezed her hand, uncertain how to respond. He had responsibilities, a career, a life among the stars, yet in just 3 days. This silent communion had reached places within him that years of human conversation had never touched. That evening, as they sat beneath the crystalline canopy watching auroras dance across Viridia's magnetic field, Naira showed him how her people communicated across distances. She placed her hands on a large crystal formation and closed her eyes. The crystal began to pulse with light, patterns rippling outward like waves on a pond. In the distance, another crystal answered with its own sequence of lights. Are there others like you? Elio asked, gesturing around them. Naira's expression shifted, her tendrils drooping slightly. She took his hand and pressed it against the crystal. Through the contact came a flood of images, a thriving community of beings like her, their skin in various shades of purple and blue, living in harmony among the crystals. Then devastation, a meteor shower tearing through the delicate ecosystem, the survivors gradually diminishing until only scattered individuals remained, isolated in different regions of the moon. Loneliness. That was the overwhelming emotion that accompanied the images. Years of solitude, of tending the crystal gardens, of waiting for others to answer her signals. Without thinking, Elio pulled her into an embrace. Her body stiffened momentarily, then relaxed against his. Where their skin touched, he felt her surprise, her gratitude, and something deeper, a spark of connection that transcended their biological differences. In that moment, Under the glow of a distant gas giant and surrounded by singing crystals, words seemed not just unnecessary, but woefully inadequate for what was growing between them. The tremors began while they slept. Naira's smaller form curled against Elio's chest in a nest of bioluminescent moss. The entire crystal structure vibrated, creating harmonics that jolted Elio awake. Naira was already moving, her tendrils flaring bright crimson, the color of alarm. She grasped his hand urgently, and a jumble of impressions flooded his mind. Danger. Crystal song. Great movement. Must go deeper. An earthquake, Elio asked, though he knew the question was pointless. He followed as she pulled him through a passage he hadn't noticed before. Descending into the heart of the massive crystal that housed her sanctuary, the tremors intensified. Fragments began breaking from the ceiling. Naira pressed her palm against a section of wall, which responded by opening into a chamber unlike anything Elio had seen before. The space was perfectly spherical, its walls lined with crystal formations that pulsed in synchronization. In the center floated what appeared to be a pool of liquid light. She guided him to the edge of the pool, her eyes reflecting its glow. Through their joined hands came an instruction. Trust. Submit. Together. Before Elio could process her meaning, Naira stepped into the pool, pulling him with her. He expected to feel wetness, but instead encountered a sensation like being suspended in pure energy. The liquid light enveloped them. Suddenly his consciousness expanded exponentially. He was no longer just Elio, he was experiencing Naira's awareness alongside his own. Her memories became accessible to him. Childhood among a diminishing tribe. Learning the crystal songs from elders who eventually faded away, centuries of solitary existence tending the crystal forest. He felt her loneliness as if it were his own. The ache of being the last of her kind in this region of Viridia. Simultaneously, he sensed her exploring his memories, Earth's sprawling cities and oceans. The research station orbiting the gas giant, his colleagues and family, the books he'd read and music he'd loved. He felt her wonder at concepts like written language and recorded sound, things that seemed unnecessarily indirect to a being who communicated. Pure thought and emotion. Most startling was experiencing how she perceived him, not as the composed scientist he presented to the world, but as a soul vibrating with curiosity, compassion, and a loneliness that mirrored her own. In her perception, his physical form was secondary to the pattern of his thoughts and emotions, which she found beautiful in their complexity. The tremors outside intensified, but within the pool, they remained perfectly suspended and calm. Through their merged consciousness, Naira explained what was happening. Viridia was passing through the gas giant's radiation belt, causing the crystals to resonate at frequencies that could shatter the more delicate formations. The pool was a place of sanctuary during these periodic events, used by her people to commune deeply and share. Memories across generations. Hours passed as they floated in this state of shared consciousness, learning more about each other than would have been possible through years of conventional communication. Elio experienced Naira's form of artistic expression, the cultivation of crystal formations to produce specific emotional responses, and she, in turn, absorbed his understanding of mathematics and physics, finding parallels to her people's intuitive knowledge of crystal harmonics. When they finally emerged from the pool as the tremors subsided, something fundamental had changed between them. The barrier of their different species seemed insignificant compared to the profound compatibility of their minds. Naira's fingertips traced the contours of his face with newfound understanding, and Elio found himself responding to the subtle shifts in her bioluminescence as easily as reading expressions on a human face. That night, as they ascended back to her living quarters, Elio realized the emergency beacon from his ship, if it had ever activated, was now surely destroyed. His chances of rescue had diminished to almost nothing. The thought should have terrified him, but instead, he felt a strange sense of peace. Naira turned to him, her tendrils glowing with a warm amber hue he'd never seen before. She took both his hands in hers, and the emotion that flowed through their touch needed no translation. Even without the pool's enhancement, it was love transcending their biological differences. their lack of common language, even their different perceptions of reality. And in that moment, Elio Marsden, man of science and rational thought, surrendered completely to a connection more profound than anything he had ever known. Weeks melded into what Elio estimated must be 2 months since the crash. His beard had grown full, and his once pristine research uniform had been replaced by garments Naira had crafted from fibers harvested from crystal blooms. Fabrics that shifted color with his emotions, much to Naira's apparent delight. Tonight, they sat at the edge of a crystal pool, reflecting the gas giant overhead, their fingers intertwined. Elio had learned to initiate contact communication himself, focusing his thoughts and emotions into coherent impressions that Naira could receive. It wasn't as fluid as her natural abilities, but the joy that radiated through her skin whenever he succeeded made the effort worthwhile. "I never thought silence could be so expressive," he murmured, knowing she wouldn't understand his words but would sense the contentment behind them. Naira turned to him, her free hand rising to trace the contours of his jaw. Through her touch came a question, one he'd felt increasingly often in recent days. More? Closer us? The concepts were simple, but layered with meaning. She was asking for intimacy, for the deepening of their bond beyond the mental communion they'd already shared. Elio's heart thundered in his chest. The differences in their biology hadn't seemed to matter during their mental connections, but physical intimacy was uncharted territory. He responded by lifting her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her palm. The gesture was human, but the intention behind it universal. Through the contact, he projected his answer, yes, together. Learn Naira's skin, illuminated with patterns he'd come to recognize as joy and excitement. She stood, guiding him back toward their sanctuary. Inside, she had prepared the space, filling it with clusters of crystals that emitted a soft, pulsating glow synchronized with what Elio now recognized as the rhythm of her heartbeats. She turned to face him, her iridescent eyes reflecting the crystal light. With deliberate slowness, she removed the woven garment she wore, revealing her form fully for the first time. Her purple skin was marked with intricate patterns of bioluminescence that intensified with her emotions. Creating a mesmerizing display across her slender physique, Elio followed suit. Removing his own clothing with reverent care, Naira approached him, her head tilted in curiosity as she studied the differences between them. Her fingers traced the contours of his chest, shoulders, and face, leaving trails of warmth wherever they touched. When their bodies finally met in an embrace, the sensation overwhelmed him. It wasn't just physical pleasure, though, that was certainly present, but a complete emotional merge. Every point of contact between them became a channel through which their consciousnesses flowed into one another. He felt her desire, her curiosity, her profound affection, all as vividly as his own emotions. Their joining transcended physical mechanics, becoming a dance of sensation and shared awareness. Her bioluminescence synchronized with his heartbeat. His breathing fell into rhythm with the pulses of light flowing beneath her skin. The boundaries between them blurred until Elio couldn't distinguish where his pleasure ended and hers began. In the aftermath, they lay entwined on the soft, moss-like bedding, Naira's tendrils curled around his shoulders in a protective embrace. Through their continued contact, Elio sensed something new, a contentment so profound it bordered on revelation. For Naira, this union went beyond physical or even emotional connection. It was a sacred act among her people, a binding of life forces. "I love you," he whispered against her skin. And though she couldn't understand the words, she responded with a wave of emotion that conveyed the same sentiment with far greater depth than language ever could. As dawn broke over the crystal forest, bathing their sanctuary in prismatic light, Elio realized how completely his perspective had shifted. The scientist who had crashed on this moon would have been frantically seeking ways to communicate his location, to return to his kind. Now, he found himself hoping the rescue beacon had never activated at all. The sound was faint at first, so faint that Elio mistook it for one of the crystal formations singing in the wind. But as it grew louder, a cold realization settled in his stomach. Engines, approaching spacecraft engines. Naira sensed his distress immediately. her tendrils shifting to a concerned indigo as she placed her hand on his shoulder. Through their connection came her question, wrong. Pain? Fear? How could he explain? In the 3 months they had been together, Leo had all but forgotten his former life, his mission, the colleagues who might be searching for him. He had integrated himself into Nira's world, learning to read the crystal forests, to communicate without words, to love beyond the boundaries of species and language. He took her hands in his, focusing intently to project clear thoughts. My people, coming, looking for me. Nira's eyes widened, the glow beneath her skin dimming to a muted lavender. Her response came as a complex swirl of emotions, misunderstanding, fear, sorrow, and a question that broke his heart. Leave. Return? Forget? No, he said aloud, squeezing her hands and pushing all his conviction into the contact. Never forget. Never. Together, they ascended to the highest point of the crystal structure that had become their home. From there, they could see the research vessel descending through Viridia's thin atmosphere, its searchlight sweeping the crystal forest. It would find the wreckage of his ship soon enough, and from there, tracked any signs of survivors. Nira stood silent beside him, her body language conveying more than words ever could. She understood what was happening, what choices lay before him. She would not ask him to stay, would not place that burden on him. But her entire being radiated the hope that he might choose to remain. The decision crystallized in Elio's mind with sudden clarity. He had come to Viridia as a researcher, seeking to understand its unique properties. What he'd found instead was a form of communication and connection that human science had never imagined possible. His findings could bridge worlds, create understanding between species, perhaps even revolutionize how humans related to one another. But more than that, he had found Nira, found love in its purest form. Unburdened by the limitations of spoken language and cultural expectations, as the rescue ship drew closer, Elio reached for one of the crystal formations they used for distance communication. Placing his hands upon it, as Nira had taught him, he focused his thoughts into patterns of light that pulsed outward, a basic signal that he hoped would be recognized as deliberate rather than natural. Nyra watched him with curious eyes, her head tilted in question. Signal. Calling them. He nodded, taking her hand to share his plan. He would meet with his people, explain his discoveries, arrange for proper diplomatic contact between humans and the Viridians. But he would not leave, not permanently. This moon, this crystal forest, this silent woman whose touch spoke volumes, had become his home. The rescue ship altered course, following his signal to their location. As it approached, Nira's grip on his hand tightened, her skin pulsing with anxiety. Elio stroked her tendrils gently, projecting reassurance with each touch. Dr. Marsden? A voice crackled from the ship's external speakers as it hovered above the crystal spire. Is that you down there? We've been searching for months. Elio stepped forward, Nira slightly behind him, but still holding his hand. It's me, he called back, and I'm not alone. I've made first contact with an intelligent native species, the Viridians. This is Nira. The silence that followed was thick with implications. First contact protocols, quarantine procedures, scientific documentation, all the bureaucracy of human exploration that now seemed so cumbersome compared to the direct communion he'd experienced with Nira. I'll need to bring you aboard for medical evaluation, the voice eventually responded. Standard procedure after prolonged exposure to an alien environment. Leo felt Nira's fear spiked through their joined hands. He turned to her, placing his palms gently on either side of her face in the gesture she had used to first share her name. With every ounce of his concentration, he projected his intentions into the contact. Short time away. Return to you. Promise. Love. Her response came not just through touch, but through the crystal beneath their feet, through the air between them, through the luminescent patterns that danced across her skin. Absolute trust, profound love, and patient acceptance of whatever path he chose. As the rescue ship extended its boarding ramp, Elio faced his colleagues with newfound purpose. He would teach them what he had learned, that across the gulf of species and biology, Understanding could be found in silence, in touch, in the direct communion of consciousness. That some connections ran deeper than words could express, existing in a language as old as sensation itself. And when he had fulfilled his obligations to science and exploration, he would return to the crystal forests of Viridia, to the silent symphony of emotions that flowed between himself and Naira, to the love that had claimed him completely without a single word spoken. For in the vastness of space, across the boundaries of biology and language, he had discovered the most profound truth of all, that the deepest connections need no translation. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Research Sonnet 3.7.